One. We are live. Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, a business podcast on global PropTech, where we talk to PropTech founders, CEOs, and lately a lot of VCs in this space and learn from them how to build and manage successful PropTech companies. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Angie Mahtaney. She's a business mentor for Brigade Reap. And what is Brigade Reap is something that Angie will explain to us and about a little bit about her background. Angie is a results-oriented entrepreneur in the apparel industry with the knowledge, experience, and passion to transform traditional apparel manufacturing company into an organization that responds effectively for changing retail industry. As you can see, I read out a template description there, and Angie is gonna explain what kind of transformation she did in a past. She has been an angel investor. She has invested in companies across multiple industries, including real estate, consumer goods, data analytics, healthcare, biotech, and AI-based digital marketing. Before we welcome Angie, just a quick note to all our listeners out here. As you might have come again, if you're a repeated listener, you would have seen that we have grown in our subscriber base in the last month or so. So we have close to reached 2000 subscribers both on YouTube and Spotify, in spite of PropTech still being a niche content by itself. So it goes to show that we are actually growing in popularity. So keep that support coming in. And if you have not yet liked or subscribed, or on Spotify, if you have not left your comments there, left your reviews, please do that, because the more people like and subscribe, the wider is the reach of this content. We have had some very fascinating guests, interesting guests from globally, and we have a lineup of very interesting guests in the future days to come as well. So with that, let's welcome Angie. Angie, welcome to PropTechBuzz. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Ravi, for having me. Really appreciate it. And congratulations on the growth numbers. That's exciting.
Thank you, Angie. And what is also exciting is what Brigade Reap is standing at the forefront of this transformation, and how you are leading the front on the PropTech space, especially in India. And that's exactly why I was piqued, and I wanted to have you come over and give a little insight on how this industry is shaping up and how you're contributing towards this change. But before we get into the meatier stuff of Brigade Reap, why don't we learn a little bit about your background, what all you have done in your career, and your transition story to be associated with Brigade Reap?
Sure. So I've spent the last year at Brigade Reap. I joined as a big business mentor. And prior to that, I was running an apparel manufacturing company for about 11 years with operations in India and Bangladesh. Alongside that, I also co-founded and sold a cold pressed juice brand, and have been an avid angel investor, as you mentioned in your introduction, across industries. And coincidentally, half my portfolio has been in PropTech, unknowingly. So I suppose that lent and was quite helpful to the network that I need and the experience I've needed for my job at Reap. Prior to that, I was working at Deloitte Consulting in New York in their strategy and operations practice. And before that, I was getting my master's at Columbia University in New York.
Nice. Do you want to shed some light on the size of businesses that you built and sold, maybe, if you're okay with it?
Sure. So the textile manufacturing the apparel manufacturing business employed about 12,000 people at its peak. We were doing about $100 million in revenue every year. So it's a fairly decent sized business. The cold pressed juice brand was, of course, a startup in every sense of the word, and we got acquired fairly quickly. But we did achieve a fairly reasonable growth in the couple of 3 years that we were running the business before we sold it. So it was I think we one of the reasons we got acquired was because of how fast we got ourselves positioned in major retail outlets in Bangalore, and the exposure that we got. And considering a juice bottle costs about 150 rupees, the kind of traction we saw early was quite phenomenal. So those are the size of the businesses. I mean, in terms of angel investments, as a typical angel investor, come in very, very early, first round, valuation sub 10 crore, companies raising 1 crore to 2. That's the stage I was kind of playing at.
Got it.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
in terms of how I sort of landed at Reap, I think if you look at sort of my resume and career path over the years, I've been fairly kind of industry agnostic. And one of the consistent themes has been, this affinity to the startup ecosystem and entrepreneurship. Even when I was in business school, I started a franchise to market suits to business school students, right? Because they're
Wow.
interviewing for jobs and things like that. So there's always been sort of that entrepreneurial bug that I got bit by many years ago. And so when I was, had an opportunity to look for something, and I came to learn of Reap and what they do, this really piqued my interest, because even though I didn't have a real estate industry experience per se, I think the skill set and experience of starting a business, running a medium-sized business, understanding the hygiene, problem solving, firefighting, and thinking outside the box, sales and marketing. You end up getting experience obviously across the entire gamut of a business. And I think when I figured out I want to do something in the startup space, I was trying to find something that allowed me to leverage that wide range of experiences. And I reached a point in my career where my work and time needed meaning. So I think being able to spend my time working with young founders who are trying to change the world, the way we build space, occupy space, was really fascinating for me, and really has been quite rewarding. So that's what got me here to Reap.
Got it. And your experiences in non-prop tech space, I mean, the business is a business, right? The fundamentals
Exactly,
of the businesses are the same.
exactly. Yeah,
Sectoral differentiation could be say 10-15% differentiation, but the foundations and the fundamentals of how you run a business is almost
absolutely.
similar. And you have had some phenomenal career in the past. Very curious, not intending to ask, but do you what were your influences for business? Do you come from a business owned family or something of that sort?
Yes, yes. So my father and grandfather both were entrepreneurs
Got it.
in the fashion and apparel space, primarily. In addition, dabbled a little bit in real estate as well. And so I think the entrepreneurial bug came as a result of dinner table conversations from my early days, I suspect.
Right. Got it. And so when you, so what is Brigade Reap? Because I have some questions on how
Sure,
is PropTech different from any other industries. We'll come to that, but
sure,
let's
sure.
understand what is Brigade Reap and what was
No,
the
absolutely.
inception of what was the inception story of Brigade Reap?
No, absolutely. So, in 2016, when we started before the word PropTech or the industry of PropTech even existed, right? And the reason it was started was because at the time, Nirupa Shankar, part of the leadership team in Brigade, really felt that there was an opportunity to create a platform that allowed startups and innovation and technology to really enable the real estate ecosystem, right? Whether it was to increase sales, reduce costs, reduce carbon footprint. There was a massive vacuum in that space. And that's why REAP was started. It was really started to enable growth in the entire industry, not just Brigade, right? And that's why REAP was started about 6.5 years ago. And in that time, we have worked with early stage startups, 68 of them, and we've selected the 68 out of about approximately 1,200 applications, of prop tech companies. And we worked with them to kind of help first understand what is the pain point that you're really trying to solve, right? Because we often find startups will find a solution, but there isn't clarity on the problem you're trying to solve, right? So I think for us, the program is really around understanding the problem and making sure that the solution solves that problem, because only then you can build a business that scales, right? So the program has really been designed to get, whether you call it problem solution fit, product market fit, and then build a business around that, whether it's a business model, whether it's a GTM strategy, whether it's a pricing strategy, build your business around that, right? So the program is around spending time in the early days of a startup's journey to figure out those important pieces and foundations of a business. And then post the program, we kind of engage to help introduce startups to customers, to investors, kind of help engage hiring. We work with various legal firms that provide legal assistance, kind of, as a startup goes from early stage to seed to growth to Series A. providing them different help, kinds of help along the way. That has been REAP's program all along. We were the first ones in Asia. Like I said, we did this before the word PropTech even existed. And of course, now it's really great to see that there's so many other players doing it as well, because that just expands the impact that all of us can have, as a community of players trying to enable startups and innovation.
Got it. You said 68 of them have been part of Brigade REAP. I would say this is an accelerator program. Is the right way to put it? Accelerator
That's
program.
right. It's an accelerator. It is an accelerator program. We have other offerings as well, but largely an accelerator program.
Right. So accelerator does not mean you have invested on those 68 companies. Am I right? Like
that is correct. We do invest in companies, but we certainly haven't invested in all 68.
Got it. And how many would be a portfolio where you have invested? Is first of all, is investment, is VC a big portion of this, or it is primarily an accelerator?
If you think about early stage businesses, right, while they need mentorship, early stage businesses also need traction and they need money, right?
Right.
And there's no point providing one in the isolation of
Right.
others, right? So what we try to do is to be able to offer one or more of the offerings together, right? So we do invest, absolutely. I wouldn't call us a VC at all.
Mhm.
We do invest because that's just a function of what early stage businesses need. So
Got it.
we have invested in a handful of companies, let's say 7 or 8 perhaps companies across the last 6.5 years. We are, however, making it a larger part of our strategy going forward. Again, like I said, the impetus being that a lot of the early stage startups require funds to kind of get the show on the road, right?
Got it. Okay. And so you mentioned about the vision and the mission of Brigade REAP. Who were so you said it started in 2015. Who were the early people? Like who are the people behind Brigade REAP?
So it started in 2016 and it was essentially the brainchild of the leadership at Brigade at the time. So, Mr. Jayashankar, Nirupa Shankar, Pavitra Shankar. And
What is Brigade, by the way? Sorry, I'm asking a lot of dumb questions here. So, what is Brigade? Is Brigade a different entity than Brigade?
Brigade is the real estate developer group in the South.
I see. Got it. Okay.
One of the largest and most well known in the country.
Got it.
So it is a subsidiary of the parent real estate developer group.
Cool. And then, and you have been here for the past year or so, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a year this week. That's right.
Got it. So my question to you was, when you start working with these 68 is a huge number, isn't it? First of all, I didn't even imagine India could have 68. I'm sure these are not startups that are competing. They are 68 individual unique problems to be solved. Am I right? Or there are some.
I think at the early stage level, we don't see it as competition. At least in our portfolio, we see them a lot as cross collaboration opportunities. We find a lot of our startups working together and finding opportunities to offer a more sort of holistic set of services by playing together. So, for example, if you've got a facilities management startup and then we've got an IoT or BIM startup, right? Can you leverage the offerings to create a more holistic set for a customer? Right? And that becomes really powerful when you start building a sizable portfolio.
Got it. So, what would if you lay out these 68 on the table, what would it look like? Which spaces are there? Residential, commercial? You mentioned facilities management.
So it's a combination of residential, commercial, hospitality, retail. In terms of areas, I would say 50% of them are in the climate tech / sustainability space, which is interesting because ESG and climate tech have been more at the forefront in conversations over the last, let's say, few years. They weren't necessarily, at least in India, 6.5 years ago, right? So it's pretty incredible that a company that was founded 6.5 years ago continues to have a portfolio, wherein 50% are sustainability focused. And I think that just goes to show sort of the also intent of the company and the group on climate tech and sustainability, right? It is a priority for us, and so we're always looking for solutions in the climate tech space. Then we have big data companies. We've got construction tech companies like robotics and 3D printing, software companies in construction tech. We've got your facilities management and smart building. We've got community management. We've got digital marketing. The entire gamut. And the way we look at it is, if there is a play or a solution that can enable the real estate ecosystem in any way, right? Some call it urban tech, some call it prop tech. I mean, and for us, those are almost limiting in some sense. I mean, because we look at any startups that will, in some shape or form, create value for a real estate company. And I'm not just talking developers, right? It could be architects, it could be civil construction companies, it could be brands like Jaguar. And in some cases, the application is for an enterprise, right? So it's a fairly broad kind of definition, but those are really the areas in which our startups play.
Got it. My question to you was, since you come from you transition into PropTech, how is PropTech different from any other industry? What are the unique characteristics of PropTech that makes different and challenging, maybe?
I think what makes it challenging is the adoption of technology is slow in real estate compared to what I've seen in other industries. And I understand why, right? I mean, look at the kind of structures and engineering that goes into what we're building, right? That's incredibly complex. And so it's tricky. But I will say the good news is, we are seeing a much higher adoption and openness to adopting technology in real estate. I mean, when we started, tech spend as a percentage of revenue was about 0.5%. Now it's closer to 1.5, 1.75%. So it's growing, right? And so I think what has made it challenging is that adoption's been low. And if you look at, the sort of growth trajectory of, let's say, fintech, edtech,
Right.
they've been sort of hockey stick, right? Whereas PropTech has been flatter, right? And what that eventually means is that it's a longer cycle, right? Whereas a startup may be able to raise funds or exit in a few years, the PropTech cycle is larger because it takes is longer because it takes a lot longer to get to a certain sort of size of scale. Number one. Number two, we found that one of the most important characteristics of a PropTech business is being able to achieve profitable unit economics, because funding also, funding is not as fast or not as heavy as you would see in a fintech or a health tech, right? And so therefore you've got to build a business that can stand on its own 2 feet, and that's when you really start to attract interesting investments, right? So you see a lot of those kinds of businesses that don't grow as fast, but they're more sort of focused on stability from a unit economics and financial standpoint. So I think those things make it a little different. And what we're seeing nowadays also that's interesting is there are a lot of global clients who are looking at solutions that are built in India but are also relevant for the global market. So we're seeing a lot of success in companies kind of, I wouldn't say pivot, but expanding their reach and customer base outside of India, the Middle East, Europe in particular, East Asia. We're seeing a lot of positive sort of growth there. So one has to. I think it's a tricky balance, right? Because as a founder in the beginning, you don't want to spread yourself too thin. You want to focus, but at the same time, you've got to find a balance between being able to find where you'll be able to your market where you'll be able to grow fast enough, right? So it's an interesting sort of problem or conundrum, if you will, for a founder.
Right.
But those are the things that make PropTech a little bit unique from what I've seen in other spaces.
Got it. So given the characteristics of this industry, which is flatter, as you said, what is the investor sentiment? Are they aware of this dynamic, and do they have the patience to see through in a long time frame to reap the benefits of the investment?
I think, look, there are different investors for different seasons, right? And so if I go to, let's say, a VC that is focused on D2C or consumer, they're not gonna, their ethos is totally different. They're not gonna find this appealing at all.
Right.
But I think there is a large category and a growing category of investors who are more kind of focused on businesses that are perhaps growing slower, but are building sort of profitable, sound businesses, and are then their cycles in their mind are longer, right? There are absolutely those investors, and I think that's why the entry, we were, of course, when we started, there was nobody doing this. of
Hmm.
late there have been a lot of other players who have entered the space, and I think that's great for us because that's only expanding the sort of investment pool that our startups and any prop tech startup has access to. It's bringing a lot more education about the importance of prop tech and the importance of adoption of technology. So I think you're seeing, if you just look at the last year, how many new kind of prop tech VCs, funds, accelerators have started. It's been tremendous. And I think that's a really, really encouraging and indicative sign of the openness to this kind of business, this kind of investment cycle in the country.
Got it. So when you mentioned about focusing on profitable unit economics, does it come at a compromise to scale, and how do you
Yeah,
ensure?
absolutely. It does. It absolutely does, and we don't expect our founders to hit profitability on day one, right? I mean,
Mm,
that's tough. But we need to be able to see a sensible path and plan to profitability within sort of the first 2-3 years, right? And
mm,
so then you find a way to balance scale in the first few years, especially with sort of making sure that you're not burning too much, right? Until you get to a point where you can actually fundraise and
mm.
not give away too much stake, right? Because the problem is when you don't have enough traction, you're burning too much money, you need to raise funds to be able to fund
Survive.
that burn.
Yeah.
You end up diluting too much stake as a founder, and that's never good. Not good for the founder. It's
Mm,
not good for the VC. It's not good for anyone, right? So
right.
I think that balance is incredibly important. I think there are ways to do it, absolutely, and one has to. And then, so I think it takes a special kind of founder.
Mm,
It's not for everyone, right? Because we don't encourage sort of just spending money on digital marketing. We don't those aren't sort of methods we necessarily promote. We're not saying digital marketing isn't important, but there are a lot of startups who'll come and they'll just, when we talk about your GTM strategy, you talk about, okay, spend on social media, on Google, SEO, all of that, but that's incredibly tough because the amount of money you end up having to burn is the odds are against you. And so then for us it becomes about, can you create, if you are creating solving a hair on fire problem, right, and you are creating a solution that solves that problem, your value prop becomes clear, and therefore you should be able to market and sell to a customer fairly easily. Now, I'm not debating that for B2B sales cycles are long. There's no question about that, especially in India, it is. But the point is that if you are actually building again, solving a problem that is sort of keeping leaders up at night versus a nice to have, then path to profitability in the first 2 to 3 years in our minds should exist.
mm.
That's how we see it.
Got it. So since you are a veteran, you have been an serial entrepreneur. These days, so I get to receive a lot of pitch decks almost every week.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I've noticed is a slide deck on capital efficiency, which I thought, okay, should have been a norm always, isn't it?
Yep.
But suddenly sanity has prevailed because of the dynamics and stuff like that. What are your thoughts around that? Do you also ask your startup founders?
Absolutely. And I think capital efficiency is the right word because a lot of people confuse capital efficiency with capex heavy, right? There are certain businesses that are capex heavy, and that's fine. Like there are robotics companies. These businesses need money. There are infrastructure companies. They need money, right? So capex heavy is not a bad thing. Capital efficiency is really absolutely bang on, something that we have focused on from the day that Repo started. And in my own personal experience as an entrepreneur, I believe the same thing. Even in the cold press company or in any business that I've worked with, it is all about capital efficiency, right? I mean, how quickly are you churning out your money? How reliant are you on external funds? How reliant are you on debt, right? So it's incredibly important, right? How much do you need to spend to acquire customers? I mean, looking at that, I think cash is king. That has always been the case, and it'll never change. And so that's absolutely, we're a big proponent of that. And that is when we once we spend some time with founders understanding the business and tweak their business model to solve the problem at hand, the things we look at in building out their business model is things like capital efficiency, payment cycles, cash flows. How quickly are you making your money work for you? Looking at sort of those metrics, those, and one could argue that those are things you should look at as you get scale, but from in our opinion, those are sort of hygiene habits that you build in from day one.
Right. Yeah. That's how the DNA should be shaped from early on, isn't it?
Exactly.
You made a very interesting point, which I really liked, which is there's a distinction between capex heavy and being capital efficiency, because usually there are founders who have a business which need capital, all right, and they usually are embarrassed to send the decks, because most of the decks, if they are not SaaS, are looked down upon, because SaaS is where you, as you said, where you get the hockey stick growth. And this, there are so many challenges in the world to be solved. Not everything can be solved with SaaS, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
are you saying that investors should not be averse to capex heavy, as long as it is capital efficient and there is a strong business model? And maybe
Yeah.
what has been
Yeah.
your experience as well?
I think so. I mean, I absolutely agree. And again, it goes back to the point earlier that I made, right, on the kind of ethos and investment thesis and sort of culture that a VC firm has, right? Someone who there are companies, especially D2C space, who won't invest in capex heavy businesses, right? But anybody who's looking at PropTech infrastructure, those are sustainability for that matter. Those can be capex heavy businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But what needs to be clear is that when we look at those companies from an investment lens or even acceleration lens, right? We realize that that's going to be a longer cycle. The
Mm.
exit perhaps may come from a PE play versus a VC play,
Mm.
right? And we have the appetite for that, right? So I think as long as I think VCs who are open to a different sort of cycle and are accepting of that, I think absolutely should not run away from capex heavy.
I'm loving this conversation, because I don't have such conversations with founders. Okay, because founders, they will talk about the business, but you are talking about a business as a foundation, as a culture, right? So you mentioned something. You said exit may happen PE play versus VC play. Could you I usually like grab onto anything that I need to learn from. What is the difference between PE play and VC play there?
So the PE plays are more, they're larger ticket sizes,
Hmm.
more sort of larger businesses, right? So let's say you've got a SaaS company, right?
Correct.
Now that, let's say a founder needs to raise every 2 years, right?
Hmm.
Initially there's low sales. Every time a founder is sort of raising, the ticket sizes are small, the valuations relative to PE are small. They'll be initially kind of under the $1 million range valuation, then it'll go to three, then it'll go to five. The
Correct.
PE play tends to focus on funding kind of larger businesses, right? More stable businesses. They don't play necessarily in the very early stage, right? And so, what I think it's two sort of totally different kind of investment sort of channels, if you will.
Right.
So we have companies that are building, let's call it alternate to sort of paver blocks using recycled plastic, right? Now they've got manufacturing businesses.
Right.
Now, very early on, they need money, but and as they scale, the kind of money they need to put up plants across the country will be in the tens of 15s, hundreds, millions of dollars. But those aren't necessarily VC plays, right? Because
Mm.
those are, they're giving you a 12, 15% PBT every year, right? Or even PAT every year. They're not going to give you these bullet returns of like 100x in 3 years, 4 years, right? Whereas it's
Mm.
giving you a consistent return year on year. Those are more
Right.
sort of PE type businesses, right?
Right.
So we are open to both kind of routes or paths,
Mm.
if you will,
Mm.
because we recognize that, like you said, right, not every problem in the world can be solved by SaaS. There are a lot of, I mean, there's a reason made in India is becoming such a big
Right.
important kind of trend in our economy, right? I
Right.
mean, manufacturing requires capex. Those aren't VC businesses typically, right? So we personally look at kind of either option, and then we go into it with eyes wide open, saying, look, we may not get a VC exit in 3 to 5 years. It may be a PE exit in 7 to 8, possibly, right? Possibly.
Mm.
You can't predict the future either which way. But we're open to sort of that path, because we understand that and those businesses, though, when we look at, they have to be kind of, we have to see a very clear path to profitability in 12 to 18 months, because
Right.
these businesses that are PE businesses, that are long-term businesses, they can't be reliant on funding quickly, because the minute they are, a risk comes. Because if they don't get VC funding, then the whole business sort of collapses, right? So you look at it from a very different lens.
Very good. Yeah. So you mentioned about that you were the early ones in India, and then suddenly you see a lot of other players. Who are the prominent players who are running accelerator programs for PropTech, or even
So there
funding?
are a couple of guys, right? And they're more investor. I think the other accelerator is probably Gruhas, Anthill. I think largely, Aurum
Who's
PropTech.
who's the second
uh,
one?
Gruhas in partnership with Anthill, right? They're running a
And
program.
okay. Hmm.
And you've got more of investor type, right? The Aurums, HDFC Heart. So there's a lot. There's a lot that have sort of Credai and VCATs have tied up. So there's been a lot of new partnerships and funds and sort of mechanisms to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in the real estate space that have come in the last 12 to 18 months, I'd say.
By the way, just news. I don't know if you heard this. Aurum acquired Nestaway this morning. No.
That's right. I saw that this morning. I saw that this morning.
Good. Thank you. Let's talk about valuation play here, because
Mhm.
since you're talking about the startups, usually when they are raising any pre-seed round, are they what do you see the trend? Are they bootstrapping some of these founders for a couple of years, like getting funds from the friends and family and running it? What do you see are the founders' behavior, or they are raising some pre-seed right away
You
with
see a mix of
what
both.
valuation? Yeah.
You see a mix of both. I think more often than not, Reap takes on founders that have traction before they have raised money or raising money. And so then that obviously comes with sort of bootstrapping, right? And that is, when you do that, is when you build the focus on building a profitable business really comes in, right? Because you're not reliant on external funding. The minute a startup, and I don't want to generalize, because there are founders of all type, but what we see is when founders raise money before they've sort of even hit their first sort of dollar of revenue, that money's come in, right? And so you've got a budget to spend. Whereas I think, we see these founders who are bootstrapped, who haven't raised because they don't want to dilute early.
Mhm.
And so they keep it very tight. Those guys are very, very prudent in how they
Right.
spend money, right?
Hmm.
And so we do, and again, I don't want to generalize, because there are founders in each category, right? But by
Right.
and large, what we see is we see both kinds, and there's no right or wrong method at all.
Right.
Brigade Reap, as an organization, we don't invest in pre-traction companies. So we do get exposure to a lot of interesting path-breaking startups who come to us without having earned a single dollar of revenue. We don't invest in those, because we want companies who have established and demonstrate product market fit and validation from the market. And the best way to see that is through revenue, right?
But help me understand, if they have already achieved product market fit, why would they come to you? Like what else could you help them? Is
So
it
I'm talking about pure investment, right? For the acceleration, obviously, we
for
look at,
investment? Okay,
yeah,
got it.
yeah. But even on acceleration, I'll be honest, we do we prefer companies that show some kind of traction,
Hmm.
because there's an incubator model and there's an accelerator model, right? The kind of lifting that has to be done in incubator is much heavier, and we're not resourced to do that. What we are resourced to do is saying, all right, you've got an idea, you floated in the market, you've got some traction. Now you need to help blow up that business, and blow up that business, that model at scale, right? And
Hmm.
that's where we come in. Because if you think about it, right, what do we bring that nobody else does? It's the
Hmm.
experience that we have from being in real estate for 36 years. It's a network that we have, Brigade has created. It's the infrastructure that we have, right, where we can give pilots if the startup is ready. That nobody else can do. It's just us, right? And so our offering has to be able to leverage that. Now, I
Hmm.
can't take an idea stage or a pre-traction company and put them in Brigade, right? I mean,
Hmm.
I've got startups that are a little bit later stage,
Hmm.
that can, are ready to sort of get exposed to an organization like that, right?
Hmm.
So that's really the thinking around this.
So since lots of founders are listening, let's talk about the valuation bit, so that they are prepared in case they have an idea to to launch. So if they have achieved some traction, so they might be, if it's an enterprise software or something, they would run POCs from some enterprise companies. Okay, I mean, these companies might not buy the solution because they're still in early days. So
Fine.
some sort of a POC, and running closely collaboration with them, right? So they're building it, and they have run it, and they have implemented in the client space. Say three major players, and then they come to you. What sort of valuation would they be? Say what would be a range? Okay, maybe your ticket size is something that you could give a guideline on, and
Exactly. I think that makes
what
more
kind of
sense.
valuation and dilution. If you could give some numbers, that would be helpful.
So essentially, that's absolutely the right way to look at it. So we tend to invest anywhere between 50 lakhs to a crore
Hmm.
in each startup, right? And we want to make sure that that money is meaningful in terms of the stake that we get, right? So essentially, our sweet spot is kind of the anything under the 20-25 crore range. It's not to say that we won't look at anything beyond that. We do sometimes push beyond that, where it's a really outstanding business, outstanding founder, where love the problem they're solving. So it's not that we're not open to looking outside of that, but that tends to be kind of where we play. Basis the thinking of, look, if I'm going to put a crore and if I'm taking a 100 crore valuation, then my stake is not meaningful, right? It doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
So that's why we sort of prefer to kind of come at it at the lower valuations, and we're taking on the risk, right? Because the lower valuations, arguably, the risks are higher than earlier stage, right? And we're okay to take that risk, right? And that is why we put in smaller checks. It's just limited to a crore.
Hmm.
So, and again, we do play outside of that as well, but that tends to be the 50 lakhs to a crore tends to be kind of our sweet spot. I mean, in terms of valuations, the way we look at it is, yes, we validate it with industry multiples and benchmarks and things like that, but at the root of it, the founder has to understand and define what funds do they need for, let's call it, 18-24 months, and that can change. At a time like this, I would encourage founders to fundraise for no less than 18 to 24 months
Hmm.
because of the conditions. How much money do you really need for those 18 to 24 months, and what growth is that going to enable, right? And what are you willing to dilute? Now, when you look at what you're willing to dilute, obviously lower is better, but the way one considers it is, if I'm going to raise my first round, let's call it my pre-seed now, then I'm going to raise a seed, then I'm going to raise a series A, a series B. By the time I get to series A, as co-founders and founders on the cap table, I should have 50%, right?
Hmm.
That's 40 to 50 is kind of where the minute you go lower than that is where you start to create problems, because founders though don't have skin in the game as you get bigger, right? So you've
Hmm.
got to backward calculate how much can you dilute
Hmm.
at the earliest stages, right? Especially when you don't have much traction. It's early stage is not going to have much, and so it really comes down to how much can you afford to dilute for the right investor, right? I would encourage startups to look at and picking investors wisely, right?
Hmm.
Investors who have similar sort of are aligned in terms of values, thinking, growth principles,
Hmm.
can add strategic help, are proactive, right? I mean, founders really should be very picky, not just take money from anyone, right?
Hmm.
So that it's not just about the check that you're getting.
Right.
It's about so much more than that. The multiplier enablement that comes from the relationship with the right investor can be really powerful.
Hmm.
So, excuse me. So, from a valuation standpoint, that's how we think about it. It's a
So
very long answer to the
yeah,
question.
no, very valuable. So you mentioned about multipliers. So is the multiplier now conservative, like given the time now?
It
And
has fallen. It has come down.
hmm,
Funding has dried up. There's still money for good founders. There
hmm,
is no question about it. I haven't seen a shortage of investors chasing good founders,
hmm.
but valuations have come down.
So the level of filtering has gone up, and a good promising idea is still getting money. Yeah, I am also getting surprised by a lot of news there. And also, is there a trend that a lot of pre-seed investment is gone on the rise and not the later rounds? So it's a good
Yeah, I
time.
think.
It's a good time for a lot of new ideas and new founders to start because there is capital there. There might not be capital who are raising further rounds, right?
Yeah, I think the early stage, the funds haven't the fundraise levels haven't dropped. They continue to stay stable, and if not stable, a little bit higher. Whereas you've seen a decline in funding of the later stage organizations.
Right.
That's
So
absolutely true.
got it. So again, valuation is, there's no exact science to valuation, right? So when founders come in with exaggerated valuation numbers, does it get into a negotiation wherein you say, no, this doesn't work out, and then you reduce the multiples and stuff like that? Is that how the conversation is, vis-a-vis say 3 years ago where it was hot?
So we've always had that same principle. If you don't, if you're outside of that range, or if your multiple doesn't make sense to us,
Hmm.
um, we don't look at it. There's no point, right? Because
Hmm.
we don't want to discourage the founder. They may have perfectly good reasons for why they're asking for what they're asking. It just doesn't fit well with our thesis and our sort of investment methodology, right? But that's specific to us. So um, we negotiate when we believe that we're close enough,
Hmm.
where we can, with logic and analysis, we can come to an agreement. But
Hmm.
very often we'll see a startup that's doing, let's say 5 lakhs of revenue a month, asking for an 80, 90, 100 crore valuation. We don't negotiate. There's no point.
Point. Yeah. You mentioned about a runway of 18 to 24 months. So usually when you have planned out your 18 months runway and the burn and stuff like that, how much should you raise? Should you raise exactly the month, or you should do 2x of that runway or something?
We say 18 to 24 month runway. Don't do more, don't do less, because on the less side, if you do less, then you're going to end up getting out on fundraising again in six
Yeah.
months, 4 months, and then you can't focus on your business, right? Whereas if you raise more, you're diluting too much, especially early, right? You don't want to dilute too much, because your whole cap table goes off in the future, right? And you're
Mm,
working so hard.
mm,
You don't want to give up your equity. It is your most prized possession, and so you don't want to raise too much either. So we always encourage 18 to 24 months. Maybe you keep a 5-10% buffer, but and then what's important is making sure that with the usage of funds and your budgets and your burn that you've set out, you're managing that sort of week on week, month on month, using sort of metrics, KPIs, reports with your teams, making sure that you're sticking to that, right?
mm,
So that if your plan is okay, I've got an 18 to 24 months runway, you can get out to fundraise in a year, and that year you focused on growing your business. So
mm,
when you're going out to fundraise again, there's a significant improvement in valuation.
mm. Got it. Let's talk about your role. So, what does business mentor mean? I mean, you have the top job here, I know, but what all entails as part of your job?
It's sort of a catch-all title, you know. So my, like I said, my passion has always been sort of working with founders.
Mm,
So no matter what other responsibility I have, I want to be able to continue to spend my time mentoring startups and founders. In addition to that, I'm part of the leadership team at Brigade Reap. So a lot of that um, involves kind of developing new business models, investment strategies, business ideas, collaborations. So if you were to boil that up, it's really around, okay, we've built an incredible platform over the last 6.5 years, we've led the way. How do you now maintain that first mover advantage, and what are the, from two angles, right? One is, how do you make sure that you continue to create value for startups? So much has changed, right? I mean, 7 years ago versus today, there weren't as many players, and so now capital is abundantly available. And so how do you make sure, as Brigade Reap, you are really creating value for the startup? And it changes, right? And so I think initially our vision was to be able to create the PropTech ecosystem. Today it is to propel the ecosystem at scale and
mm,
to do so globally. So really my responsibility involves working with the team members on what does the model look like to be able to achieve that objective,
mm.
if
Got it.
that makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned about business models with leadership. So, business models for the startups that you are mentoring, right?
Not
Or
even our own Reef's business model, right? I mean, we've traditionally been an accelerator, but we have launched a few new business offerings as well that we believe create value for startups.
I
So
see.
continuously sort of, iterating the model so that you're getting better at what you do, you're achieving scale, and most importantly, you're creating value for startups. You're giving them a service that they really need.
Got it. How does it operate, the entire model? How does one apply to Brigade Reap? And then what is the entire, like, what's the duration of this program and what is the entire process?
Great question. So, we issue open for applications. We do two cohorts a year, somewhere
Mm,
between sort of 5 and 10 startups per cohort. And we issue applications. We kind of publish it on our social media accounts, and we open for applications. And startups are encouraged to apply on what we call F6S as the platform.
mm,
And once these applications come in, we do a couple of levels of filtration, which include a couple of calls, and we select, let's call it 20 startups for a jury.
mm,
And the jury consists of a combination of industry experts,
mm,
VCs, and members from the Brigade team. Like I said, so we've
mm,
been on the ground for 36 years, and there's a lot of experience that can be leveraged. So we make sure that we incorporate their feedback as well in selecting startups. And then from these sort of 20, the 5 to 10 startups are selected,
mm,
and they go through a 16 to 18-week program.
mhm,
And the program, like I said, the bulk of it revolves around taking our startups to, potential stakeholders to understand the real problem that is being faced in the area. And then working the rest of the time is, kind of spent working with the startup on building their business model basis the understanding that we achieve in kind of phase one, right?
mm,
And when I say business model, I'm talking about pricing, I'm talking about go-to-market strategy, I'm talking about cost,
mm,
all of that, right? And building your team. What kind of team do you need? How, what does the 3 year roadmap look like from a hiring perspective as well? The entire gamut, right? Spend the rest of the time doing that. And so that's what happens 16 weeks. There is no one size fits all, to be honest, because each startup comes to us with a different problem. They come at a different stage.
mm,
So the help that they need and where we can play is tends to be very different.
mm,
um, and so what we like to do is before the program starts, we sit with the startup and we create sort of the plan for the 16 to 18 weeks to make sure that both sides are aligned. This is where you
right.
need help.
Mm,
um, do you agree? What are the outcomes that we really want by the end of the program?
mm,
And so, just making sure that everyone's aligned to what the plan is, and then they graduate from the program in 16 to 18 weeks if we as a team have achieved the desired outcome.
mm,
And then post that, startups, there's no sort of formal engagement. Startups come to us on an as need basis. We see that most startups fresh out of the program come to us, I'd say, once every 10 days, because 45% of our startups have kind of fundraised from
nice.
institutional investors. And so what we found, a lot of them raise within the first 12 months of graduating. So a lot of help is required in facilitating intros to the right VCs,
Mm,
you're getting their pitch decks ready, getting them prepped for their pitches.
mm,
That, and also on this customer side, a lot of them at that point are within 12 months are ready for exposure to customers. So we kind of take them out to the entire ecosystem that we believe want solution to adopt solutions like that. So
mm.
the 12 months tends to be the first 12 months tends to be a fair amount of engagement, and after it's on an as need basis.
Got it. What have been some of the biggest successes of this program in the last 4 or 5 years? Maybe do you want to shed some light on what?
Like any fund, we have that same sort of 20% rule. 20% tend to give you, 80% of your returns. And so the same thing applies here as well. I mean, we've got 15, 20 startups that have been out, stellar performers.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them we hope will become unicorns.
Mm,
And interestingly, there's a couple that are disrupting kind of age-old businesses. So, for example, we've got a company called Snaptroot in our portfolio that came to us and said, I want to disrupt AutoCAD. And that's
mm.
a small feat, right? But he's done
I,
it.
I come from Autodesk. I worked at
Yeah,
Autodesk, so
yeah. So
AutoCAD was the world leader, right? So
yeah. So, essentially, and in fact, the other day, a leadership member of the leadership of Autodesk was on CNBC, and he was talking about Snapshoot. So
nice, yeah, yeah.
such great validation, right? So we have a lot of performance like that. There's VGOT that's doing water metering. There's ClearCode that's doing energy management, HVAC energy management, and air purification. There's CRE Matrix, which is doing big data. There's quite a few that, but 15, 20 of them that have been outstanding performers, continuously raising funds, well on their way to Series A. So we're pretty happy. And again, while to an average investor that may not sound great, but again, keeping in mind this is PropTech, right? Which is a different animal. One, it didn't exist when we started with these founders. So, there was no concept of this sort of adopting these kinds of technologies. So it's, given that how early we were, these results are indicative of the caliber of founders that we've had the pleasure to work with.
Right. So let's talk about scaling beyond India, right? You mentioned early on where you said that, there are lots of businesses who have potential to scale beyond India in other markets and geographies. PropTech primarily has an element of a local play because the dynamics are very local and stuff like that. Because real estate is also, the way you implement, it's not like SaaS that you can just go on a global expansion. What has been your thoughts around scaling beyond India? Have you had any past in your portfolio who have scaled
Yeah,
beyond
there are about 5 to 6 that have flipped, who have flipped altogether
India?
outside of India, and then there are many who are marketing to clientele and have had more success marketing to clientele outside of India.
I see.
Um, yeah, and even, like I was telling you, the panel in the back that was made, using agri waste by one of our startups. She's actually looking to sell in Europe and Middle East and the US, and she's well on her way to do it. So we believe that the global market is your oyster, and while as long as there is sort of sense and sensibility applied in how you go about capturing that market,
Right.
because you can't, like I said, you can't be trying to capture India, Middle East, Europe all at the same time, right? You've got to have a strategy in place. And so as long as you do it with some sort of system and sensibility, most of our businesses, including manufacturing, we think there's absolutely no reason to limit it to India. I mean, we look at global plays.
So you have massive experience in your past, and you interact with startup founders on daily basis. What have you seen? What are the traits of really good startup founders that you can say that, okay, this is going to fly? So what are the traits that you see? A personal, of course, business model and everything is good, but
Yeah,
personal, is it ambition? Is it drive? Is it
I think
is it hunger?
hunger is definitely hunger, drive. I think, we always ask the startup why they've started what they did, and the why has to be really strong for us. You know, I think grit and perseverance is incredibly important. Those are signs I look for, because one, PropTech, it's a long journey. Number two, as we all know, in any business, small, medium, large, man, things can get tough. And if you don't have what it takes to hang in there, to be resilient, to keep fighting, and to do so with a smile on your face, um, you know, those aren't sort of markers of, I think, successful sort of entrepreneurs, right? So for me, I look for founders who are okay to fail. They're gritty, they're super resilient, they're creative in the way they think in terms of problem solving, they're flexible, right? Because so often, and I can tell you, most of our startups, they came in with a certain idea, they came in with a certain product, and what they are today, 4 or 5 years later, is night and day. And these guys have been flexible and nimble enough to respond to what they're hearing in the market, to changing dynamics in the market, right? And you've got to be able to pivot quickly, right? And so we look for founders who we believe, for lack of a better word, are coachable. And then what that really translates to is they're okay to flip, to change, because at the early stage you're not really backing, you know,
The idea and
this
the product, yeah, it's the team, okay, whether they can
backing the
pull
founder,
it.
yeah,
Yeah, founder,
because
yeah.
what you learn in the years to come. I mean, look at the pandemic, right? Businesses that were superstars before couldn't stay open after, and vice versa, right? The world changes, things happen, and are you do you have what it takes to be able to respond to those changes, right? So those are the things qualitatively that we look for. Now, what are the markers? Hard to say. It's just one of those things that you know it when you see it.
Hmm.
you know
Got it. So, just since you mentioned about business model for Brigade Reap or any VCs or accelerators, what kind of so how do they operate? Like, do they have a timeline saying that okay, this is how much we will be investing? Just is it like any other business where you want some returns in the next 5 to 7 years?
Yes, very much, very much.
Very much like any regular business, right?
It's positioned like a VC, yeah, like a
like
fund.
like an investment fund. Okay, got it.
That's right. That's right.
Also, is there a lot of competition amongst VCs to get the best deals, deal flows, and access to?
No, I find the best way for us to source good startups is through partnerships and collaborations with other VCs. And if you think
Oh, so,
about,
so it's not competitive, and okay, so it's
I don't
partnership.
think so. I don't think so. I
Very good.
haven't seen it. I haven't
How
seen
does
it.
how does the partnership look like? How it's like zero sum game, no? Because it's like
I'll tell
who
you why. See, who you partner with becomes important, right?
hmm,
Because we come in very early stage. We're accelerating, we're mentoring, right? So we fit the gap that we fill in this space is before these guys are ready for big VC checks, right? We get them ready. We get the product market fit ready. So the later stage guys, slightly later stage guys, look at us as almost sort of a helping hand to them, right? We
I
are
see.
providing validation, we're getting them ready, we're getting sort of the things on an early stage. These things VCs don't necessarily have the operational sort of infrastructure to do these things, right? Well, the intent may be there. So we partner with guys who are looking to us to do that, and then give them our founders, right? So
Got it.
really, that's how we do it. I mean, we've also done deals with co-invested with other prop tech accelerators and funds. I just don't look at this as I don't look at it as competition. I look at it as, listen, the impact we can make if we play together is far greater, and the pie to me is big enough for everybody. So why not kind of engage to really create a massive impact, right? And the most effective way to do it, in my opinion, is collaboration.
Got it. Nice. So while we are in the last couple of questions here, why don't you give us a lowdown on the potential of PropTech in the coming days? Give us some macro, some lowdown, and stuff like
I think it's massive, right? Like I said, the percentage of tech spend in real estate has gone up tremendously already. And I think given the emerging trends, right, they've created structural tailwinds, I think, for PropTech.
that. Okay.
So, for example, the pandemic, the kind of regularization or regulation rather, RERA, there is no room for error, right? And how do you build and run operations, that need to be just sort of just on point in terms of costs, in terms of engineering. I mean, technology sort of has to be a player in that, right? It has to be, and it's not to replace anything or anyone. It's got to be an enabler in your business, right? So I think the emerging trends have certainly caused this. And if you look at it, real estate is scheduled to be $1 trillion business in India, and we're looking at a 1% spend. You're looking at a $10 billion market. That's
Hmm.
not. We haven't sort of hit the tip of the iceberg in
Right.
terms of those numbers. So to me, when you look at it from a macroeconomic standpoint, the power and potential of PropTech is huge, and we're just only scratching the surface.
Excellent. How does the next couple of years look for you in Brigade Reap? What's the plan like? You said you have some new business models and stuff like
Yeah,
that. So,
I think the underarching sort of objective used to be create the prop tech ecosystem. We believe we've done that, and now it's really how do you propel it and enable it and do it at scale and do it globally, right? Because mentoring 20 startups at a time is you can't do it at scale, right? It's too expensive and it takes too much time. So for us, it's how do you kind of meet those objectives, and so those are the problems that we're solving. So we are in the process of kind of launching offerings and businesses that are solving those problems. So how do you use technology to be able to enable startups or take this model sort of online, if you will, right? A version of it. Number one, um, new offerings that we believe help us play with, startups at every stage of the life cycle. So we have something called the go-to-market vertical, where
Mm,
startups who are beyond acceleration,
mm,
have product market fit, but really need doors opened and they need traction enabled. We take them on and we take them out to the ecosystem, right?
mm.
And this is only for startups that we believe are solving hair on fire problems, right?
Right.
So at least that gives us the platform to engage with slightly later stage startups, right? We're starting to invest, doing a lot more investments in startups now, both startups that come via the accelerator or they can apply independent of the accelerator as well. So we're investing a lot more. And we're looking at various other business models at the moment as well, essentially to meet the overarching goal of how do you sort of become the kings of prop tech in the world,
Mm.
or how do you retain that position in India anyway.
Angie, it was very insightful talking to you. I do not know why we do not get to hear your voice more. I think, as I said, right, because I talk to founders, they're usually talking about their own businesses, but you have a horizontal view on the entire ecosystem, and your experience comes through. So, thank you so much for sharing time with us and sharing the wisdom of all the accumulated knowledge with
No, it's
us.
my pleasure. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share what we've learned and what we want to do. We're excited and you know looking forward to hitting some great results.
Oh, we had some comments which I completely missed. So with our live audience, so there's
Sure.
Nirupa Shankar who says, "Nice to see Angie," and I do not know if you know her.
I
And
do.
then there is S D Ayappa who says, "Great to see the work that Brigade Reap is doing for the
Yeah.
PropTech ecosystem." And then Pat Panappa says, rightly said, capital efficiency. I'm sorry I missed these messages. I should have
No, that's okay. That's okay.
displayed them right then and there. With that, let's end the episode. Thank you again, Angie.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I hope our paths cross again soon.
It will.